A freezing rain lashed against the glistening streets that Tuesday evening, driving everyone inside the Grand Imperial to escape the biting chill. It was exactly 8:45 p.m. The exact moment Sarah's life as a ghost officially began for the night. The neon sign above flickered against the rain-slicked pavement, a beacon of luxury that Sarah could never afford to enter as a guest. Inside, the air smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. Outside, Sarah stood for a moment, adjusting her worn-out sneakers. At just 24, Sarah had already learned that to the wealthy patrons of this diner, she was practically invisible, working double shifts while the rest of the world slept. She felt like nothing more than a shadow. Every cent she earned went toward her son, Toby, a bright 7-year-old currently struggling through the 2nd grade at the local public school. Unlike the children of the guests inside the Grand Imperial, Toby's world was a cramped apartment with a radiator that hissed like a dying snake and a mother who was often gone before he woke up.
You're 3 minutes late.
As she walked through the service entrance, the shift manager, Mr. Sterling, didn't even look up from his clipboard.
One more time, and you'll be looking for work. At the diner down the street. We have a reputation to uphold here. 5 stars don't tolerate 4-star effort.
Sarah didn't argue. She tied her apron tight, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, and stepped onto the floor. To the billionaires in the velvet chairs, she was just a moving tray. A refill for their coffee. A ghost in a black uniform. She moved through the dining room, unnoticed and ignored, until she reached the far corner of the room. This isolated spot, table 4, was tucked away in the shadows, far from the grand windows that overlooked the city skyline. The table the other waitresses fought to avoid. It belonged to Mr. Abernathy, a man whose suit was as frayed as Sarah's spirit, and whose presence seemed to offend the polished mahogany of the dining room.
The usual, Sarah. Black coffee, extra hot, and a slice of yesterday's rye bread.
Sarah replied with a genuine smile that meant the world to him. As she poured the steaming liquid, she noticed his hands, gnarled and shaking as he tried to adjust a small, leather-bound notebook. The other staff, led by Sterling, whispered in the kitchen about the penny pincher, who sat for 3 hours and left a single crumpled dollar bill as a tip. But they didn't see the way his eyes lit up when Sarah asked him how his day was going. "Toby have his spelling bee today?" "He did, Mr. Abernathy," Sarah whispered, glancing nervously toward Sterling at table 12. His voice boomed across the room, berating a busboy, who just shattered his serving tray on the floor. But Sarah stayed at table 4 for 1 extra minute, caring for the man who actually saw her.
"He did, Mr. Abernathy. He wants to build a house for us that doesn't leak when it rains."
Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly, scribbling something into his notebook with a silver pen that looked far too expensive for his tattered coat. "A builder of dreams. That's a good boy you're raising, Sarah. Most people here only know how to build walls. You're building a man." The warm moment was pierced by the sharp click of Italian leather shoes. Mr. Sterling appeared like a shadow. "Hey, Sarah, the CEO of a venture capital firm is waiting at table 12 for a refill, and you're here gossiping with a man who can barely afford the napkins he's using." "I was just," Sarah stammered, but Sterling cut her off. "I don't care about your excuses. This is a 5-star establishment, not a charity ward. People pay a premium to breathe the air in here, and you're dragging down the property value. I know about the late nights. I know you're exhausted. But if I see you wasting 1 more second on the penny pincher, you'll be out on the street before Toby finishes his homework." But Mr. Sterling thought he understood hierarchy. He thought he understood power. He was wrong. Because in just 24 hours, he would realize he had been rehearsing the speech that would cost him his job. "Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." For the rest of the shift, Sarah moved like a machine, avoiding table 4. When Mr. Abernathy stood up to leave, he placed his usual dollar bill on the table, but this time, he tucked a small, hand-drawn picture of Toby and a building underneath it. Sterling watched from the hostess stand, a smirk of satisfaction on his face. He didn't just want Sarah to work, he just wanted to break the only dignity she had left. As Sarah cleared the table, she hid the drawing in her pocket. It was a sketch of a grand hotel with the words, "For Toby's mother." Just as Sarah turned to head toward the kitchen,
Sarah.
2 of her co-workers burst through the doors. Her namesake had the phone, but the kitchen called. As she turned back to save the plantains, Tora snatched the device, and the secret spilled out.
"Oh my God, Sarah. You won't believe what our esteemed manager just said in your namesake's chat. She went on a date with Sterling. Yeah, don't look at me like that. And I was fishing for information. He wouldn't stop bragging about his son, Derek. He thinks he's raising a prince." But when she asked him why he treats you with such disdain, he sent a laughing emoji and called you cheap labor. He thinks he's untouchable, Sarah. He has no idea how much he's digging his own grave.
The following Tuesday, Sarah's landlord had left a final notice on her door, rent or the shelter. She needed every cent of tips she could get today. And that's why she arrived at the Grand Imperial with her heart hammering. She kept her eyes glued to the revolving glass doors, waiting for the familiar sight of the frayed coat and the gentle smile. 2 p.m. came. 3 p.m. Table 4 remained empty. The drafty corner felt colder than usual, and for the first time in 5 good years, the dining room felt truly silent to Sarah. Looking for your boyfriend? Don't bother. Security saw him being loaded into an ambulance a few blocks away last night. Heart attack, they say. Not that a man like that has much of a heart left to give. Sarah's breath hitched. Is he okay? Who cares? At least, now we can put a real customer at that table. Someone who actually pays for the space they occupy. And speaking of space, I saw you slip that drawing into your pocket last week. Theft of company time is a fireable offense. Consider this your final warning. Sarah spent the rest of her shift in a daze. Every time she passed table 4, she felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't even said goodbye. She hadn't told him that Toby finished his spelling bee with an A. When she finally got home, Toby was asleep on the sofa, his second grade workbook open to a page about community helpers. Sarah sat on the floor and cried quietly so as not to wake her baby. She had no money for rent, her only friend in the world was likely gone, and the man who held her future in his hands wanted to see her fail. She stood up, her limbs heavy with exhaustion, and began to unhook her apron to change out of her work clothes. As she emptied the pockets, searching for even a stray coin for the vending machine tomorrow, finding only lint and despair, her fingers brushed against a piece of paper. She pulled it out. It was the drawing Mr. Abernathy had given her. In the chaos of double shifts and avoiding the landlord, she had completely forgotten it was there. In the dim light of the flickering radiator, she noticed digits scrawled on the back. A phone number with a note. In case of emergency, call Arthur. Without thinking, she grabbed her cracked phone. This is Arthur. Hi, I'm Sarah, a waitress at the Grand Imperial. I found your number on the back of a sketch left by Mr. Abernathy. He wrote that I should call in an emergency. I'm just his friend. Is he okay now? Please, I just need to know if he's still with us. Mr. Abernathy spoke of you often, Sarah. He called you the heart of the Imperial. As for how he is doing, he is no longer in pain. My son Toby is on midterm break. Please, just give me the address so we can both come check on him tomorrow. He shouldn't be alone. That won't be necessary, Sarah. He passed away an hour ago. But he left instructions for this exact call.
Sarah! No! Not him! He was the only one who saw us! He was the only one left!
In that moment, the world didn't just stop. It vanished. She felt like she was fading out of existence. But as she looked at her sleeping son, the grief began to harden into something else. Something sharper. The old Sarah was gone, and in her place, someone else was waking up.
Mom? Why are you crying? Is it the rent man again?
No. Baby, the rent man isn't coming back today.
Here, take the drawing Mr. Abernathy made for you.
For the first time in months, the fear of the rent man vanished. In that sketch, he wasn't just a boy in a drafty apartment. He was a hero. The night didn't end with the phone call. Arthur arrived at Sarah's cramped apartment an hour later with a briefcase full of heavy, cream-colored documents. As Toby slept, Sarah spent the pre-dawn hours signing her name over and over, her hands shaking as she tried to understand what Mr. Abernathy had left behind. By the time the sun began to rise through the cracked window, the final document slid across the table, and Arthur quietly closed the briefcase. The following morning, the lobby of the Grand Imperial was packed with the city's most powerful people. Rumors had spread like wildfire. The mysterious owner of the hotel chain had passed away. Sarah stood at the back of the room, her working dress pressed flat. She held her serving tray tightly, not out of duty, but by choice. Beside her, Toby stood in his only pair of corduroys, which he had carefully brushed twice that morning, hoping to look his best for Mr. Abernathy. He had thought the old man might be somewhere in the crowd, smiling the way he always did at table 4. Now he stood frozen, still trying to understand the words echoing through the grand lobby. He clutched the tattered, dog-eared book from his bedside table, The World's Greatest Skyscrapers. He didn't look at the gold-leafed ceiling with the fear of an intruder, but with the quiet focus of a young student studying a blueprint. Mr. Sterling stood at the front, chest puffed out like a peacock. He had spent the morning bragging about how the new ownership would finally let him fire the low-class staff and turn the hotel into an even more exclusive club.
Silence! All of you, be quiet!
Tell me, Sarah, have you heard? That little friend of yours from table 4 wasn't exactly who he pretended to be. I suppose you showed up early today thinking you'd inherited a kingdom just for serving him cheap coffee? Do you really think this place would notice someone like you? People like you should be grateful just to clean the floors here.
Sarah's eyes widened as if she had just heard the rumor for the first time. Her breath caught in her throat as a wave of feigned shock washed over her. Suddenly, a man in a sharp gray suit stepped onto the marble dais. Arthur Blackwood, the head of the city's most prestigious law firm. I am here to execute the final will and testament of Harold Abernathy. Sarah, still playing her part perfectly, let her serving tray tilt as if she were about to drop it. Whispers erupted immediately. Across the lobby, Sterling watched her with a smug smile, completely certain that this was the last day he would ever have to see the waitress again.
Harold Abernathy, the man at table 4, the penny pincher, was the man who owned the very ground we stand.
Mr. Abernathy spent his final years living as a common man, Arthur continued, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on Sarah. He wanted to see who in this city still possessed a soul. Unfortunately, he discovered that most people only value what they can exploit. Sterling stepped forward quickly, a greasy smile stretching across his face. We all loved him, of course. I personally made sure his table was always ready. Actually, Mr. Sterling, the will specifically mentions you. It says, and I quote, "To the manager who valued property over people, I leave the bill for every cup of coffee I drank while he mocked me. You are fired. Effective immediately." The lobby fell into a suffocating silence. Sterling's face turned a ghostly shade of gray. Mr. Abernathy hadn't stepped into a boardroom in a decade. He left the Abernathy Group to be run by a faceless board. You assumed the owner was some distant billionaire in a tower across the ocean. You never imagined he was the man in the tattered coat sitting at table 4.
But he was just a beggar!
He wasn't a beggar, Mr. Sterling. He was the man who signed your paycheck every month. He simply wanted to see if you were worthy of the signature. As it turns out, you weren't even worthy of the ink. As for the Grand Imperial and the controlling shares of the Abernathy estate, they are left to the only person who treated a lonely old man like a human being. Sarah, Mr. Abernathy wanted you to have the keys. He said Toby deserves a home where the roof never leaks. The silence that followed felt almost sacred. Sarah looked down at her hands, rough hands that had carried trays and scrubbed floors for years. Then she looked up at the gold-leafed ceiling of her new empire. This is a mistake. She's a waitress. She doesn't know the first thing about running a. She knows the only thing that matters. She knows how to care. Mr. Sterling? Sterling looked at her, desperation creeping into his voice. Yes.
This is a 5-star establishment. And starting today, that means everyone who walks through these doors, from billionaires to men in frayed coats, will be treated with the same respect.
You can't do this! You're nothing but a servant!
You called me cheap labor, didn't you? Go ahead. Say it again in front of everyone. You're right, Mr. Sterling. I was a servant. But the difference between us is simple. I served people. You only served your ego. Security, please show Mr. Sterling to the door.
For the first time since she had walked into the Grand Imperial years ago, Sarah wasn't the one being ordered around. Sterling didn't shout. He didn't fight. He simply stood there, crushed beneath the weight of the waitress he had threatened with homelessness just 24 hours earlier.
Oh my God. Sarah, karma is real.
Because while Sterling was being dragged toward the doors, Toby wasn't finishing homework. He was sketching the blueprints of his future. A month later, the Grand Imperial had changed. The drafty corner that once held table 4 was gone, replaced by a warm, sunlit study space for local students. Toby now had a room with a view of the park and a desk where he worked on something he proudly called the architecture of kindness. Because once, at table 4, an old man told him that the strongest buildings in the world are the ones built with kindness. Sarah Richardson watched her son quietly and wondered what kind of blessing God had placed in her life. Sarah still wore an apron sometimes, not because she had to, but because she wanted to remember the ghost she used to be. And every afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock, Sarah sits at table 4. 2 cups of black coffee. One for her. And one for the man who saw her when no one else would. And somewhere in the quiet memory of table 4, it almost felt as if an old man in a worn coat was smiling, knowing his last lesson had finally taken root. Justice hadn't just been served that day. It had been built. One act of kindness at a time. In a world that only looks at the price tag, never forget that the most valuable things, kindness, integrity, and heart, don't cost a dime. But as Sarah discovered, they can change a life forever. That is the power of the twists of fate. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything. Because on the day Sarah walked into the Grand Imperial as a waitress, she never imagined she would walk out as its owner. Before you go, think about this for a moment. Has a stranger ever shown you kindness when you needed it the most? Maybe someone opened a door, shared a meal, or simply believed in you when no one else did. Tell us your story in the comments, because sometimes, one small act of kindness can change a life forever. I'm Believe, and I'll see you next week for another Twists of Fate.